Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here is the podcast host, James Delingpole.
Hello, my lovely listening friends. Welcome to episode 3 of Delingpole, presented by me, James Delingpole, and brought to you by Breitbart and Podcast One. My guest today is, I can guarantee, one of the most extraordinary people you are ever likely to meet. He was born in a shoebox, literally, almost, the son of an unemployed coal miner, and from these humble origins he has risen, via a stint in jail and a period as a football hooligan, nicknamed Animal, to become one of Britain's leading criminal barristers. A Queen's Counsel, no less. No, don't worry, I hate lawyers too. More of that in a moment, but first let me whet your appetite by telling you how Gary Bell and I met. It was over 30 years ago. We were both at university. I was at Oxford, and I went with some chums from my college on a jaunt to Bristol, where one of their mates, a super smoothie posho friend by the name of Tom Purton, was studying law. Anyway, Tom had a very odd flatmate. He hadn't, unlike Tom and his various Etonian friends, been to a top public school. On the contrary, he had a suspiciously polyester-looking burgundy sweater, a pair of white socks, and, to cap it all, a moustache. Not a handlebar moustache or anything glamorous like that, but a stubby little tash, such as Peter Mandelson used to have before he airbrushed his own past and reinvented himself as a plummy-voiced millionaire grandee. Oh yes, one other detail. This chap with the white socks and dodgy jumper is extremely fat, and he goes by the unfortunate name of Gary. Well, can you imagine? I could hardly, but I did feel slightly embarrassed for this poor fish out of water, this poor fellow, when Tom, posho Tom, kept flagrantly correcting him on his grammar, even his accent. Gary would say something like, "Can you pass me that bottle of champagne, Tom?" And Tom would say, almost unthinkingly, "Pass, Gary. We pronounce it pass." Bit rude, I thought. Then again, Tom had been educated at Westminster. Only later did I learn that Gary himself had actually asked Tom to play Henry Higgins to his Eliza Doolittle. What Gary had sensed, possibly correctly, was that if you wanted to get on in legal circles in the 1980s, being thought pucker was still, in those days, an advantage. Lots of people like Tom took Gary to their hearts, not to be patronising or snobby or snooty or sneery, but because actually Gary is an amazing person, well worth getting to know better. Yes, he can sometimes be incredibly rude. He's reputed in some quarters to be the rudest man in Britain. He can also be insufferably arrogant on occasion, but then he's got good reason to be arrogant. Look at what he's achieved. He's also very, very funny, by the way. And if you like what you hear of him in this podcast, I do recommend you buy his excellent book, which is called Animal QC, and includes many hilarious anecdotes, very well told, some of which may even be true. So here, without further ado, is Gary Bell, brought to you by Podcast One, by Breitbart News, and of course, by me, your lovely friend, James Delingpole. Don't forget to keep those 5-star reviews coming on iTunes. Otherwise, small children will cry, puppies will die, and it will be a bit like when they cancelled that really funny comedy series they had in the 90s with Chris, whatever his name was. I can't remember its name, but there was a really funny episode where he sat on a throne. Does anyone remember? Anyway, so my guest this week is Gary Bell. And Gary Bell, as I've already explained in my preamble, has got the most extraordinary backstory. And Gary Bell is also looking at me in a slightly irritated fashion at the moment, because I've just realised that the half an hour we've spent conversing for the interview has been completely wasted because I didn't press the right button. Gary, can you ever forgive me for this? first of all?
I think there are things during that half an hour that I'd said that I wished I hadn't, James, so I shall be a little bit more careful during this.
Yeah, I was actually worried too. There was stuff you said that I think you would probably be ashamed of. And as a friend of yours, and also as somebody who wants to make damn sure our listeners aren't bored rigid.
Yes.
I would like to give your best possible performance so that people don't think, Christ, who is this bloody boring bloke you've got on this week?
Right.
But you have got the most amazing backstory. I think that if somebody wrote about this in a novel, they would be disbelieved. They would think that nobody could come from quite such a shoebox hovel background and rise to such eminence as you have. You are one of Britain's top criminal barristers, in all modesty, aren't you?
I think if I was being modest about it, I'd say I was one of the top criminal barristers.
Anyway, if you had to be immodest, where would you place yourself?
Well, modesty
Gary?
forbids me from saying where I actually feel I am. As Brian Clough said, he's not saying he's the best football manager, but he's in the top one.
Do they have a ranking of criminal barristers, actually?
No, not really. There are a lot of criminal barristers from some sets who got into trouble recently with the Bar Council for describing themselves as the best or the top or the number one criminal barrister that there is, but it's very difficult to rank them.
We were talking earlier in the thing that will never be recorded because I forgot to press the right button.
Yes.
But I was telling you how much I hated lawyers generally.
Yes.
And I talked about them as being mercenaries. And another reason I hate them, of course, is because you bastards earn so much more money than I do. Mm-hmm. But another reason that I really hate lawyers, generally, is that given that they earn so much money, they all seem to be, well, so many of them seem to be infuriatingly left-wing. There seems to be a lot of judicial activism going on in the world
There's
today.
a lot of questions there, James, all rolled
Sorry,
up into
okay.
one. That's okay, I can deal with them all, I can remember them.
Okay.
The first thing is, if you're going to hate people because they earn more money than you, then even those people serving out of the window of McDonald's, they're going to face your wrath, aren't they?
Yes,
so
that's
I
true.
wouldn't worry about
Good
that.
point.
The second thing is that you must understand yourself, having come from the upper middle classes, that the wealthier people are, then the more left-wing they tend to be. And you can't afford to be that left-wing and that liberal unless you've got a bit of wedge.
Yeah.
So your Georges Monbiot, if he didn't have family money behind himself and hadn't gone to Stowe School, he wouldn't have the luxury to be able to write the drivel that he writes. He'd have to be at work, earning a living. That's
absolutely true, yeah. Yeah.
It's all very, as Tony Blair said, new Labour, new Arga.
Yeah, well, one thinks of Seamus Milne, the advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, who was about as hard left as left can be. And where was he at school? Winchester.
Yeah.
Who was his dad? The Director General of the BBC, that horny-handed son of toil.
Well, exactly. You're going to get that, though, aren't you? And Mandelson famously said that he didn't want horny-handed sons of toil in the Labour Party, and I don't think they'll get them. I don't know that much about Jeremy Corbyn at all. I know that people tend to like him. I know that he had a lot of advantages in life and managed to squander them and get a very poor education. Didn't he go to North London Poly and get a third or something? Got 2 E's at A-level. But if that's what they want, somebody who is very sort of noble but thick as pig shit as their leader, then that's what they've got.
Yeah, that always struck me at the time as when David Cameron and his Etonians were in power. I mean, I think unfortunately it was a particularly bad clique of Etonians, but I didn't quite get the principle that one should choose from as wide a variety of schools as possible. Because I was thinking, well, Eton's gives you a pretty good education. There's nothing necessarily wrong per se with having everyone in power from Eton.
I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I always felt sorry for David. I've known David a very long time.
Yeah.
And he didn't choose to go to that school, just as I didn't choose to go to my school. But to say it's wrong that we've got so many people from Eton in government is a bit like saying, why have we got so many players from Manchester United in the England team? It's because it's the best team.
Is it?
What, Manchester United?
I didn't know about football.
Well, it's a pretty crap. Well, you should know about
actually,
football.
I think aren't they not as good as they used to be?
Manchester United.
Yeah.
They're not, no, but I don't want to debate which is the best football team. That's not the point.
Right, sorry. I was nitpicking there. You do going back to the original point I was making about your backstory.
Yes.
You were brought up in a mining village.
Luckily, eventually, yeah, I started off in my granny's house, as I think people used to back in the day.
Yeah.
And my brother was born 10 months after me, and so we had to move out. We moved into a condemned slum, back-to-back terracing in St Anne's.
Literally?
Yes, that was Pete Townsend, not the Who fellow who does a lot of interesting research on the internet.
You mean Group Captain Peter Townsend?
I mean Peter Townsend, who wrote a study of poverty in the UK.
Oh, right, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He focused it on St Anne's because it was supposed to be the poorest place you could be, and there was a book written called The Poor and the Poorest.
Gary, that is cool. So you were literally born in the poorest or lived in the poorest place of the poorest in England.
I think it was the poorest place in England. Yeah, it was a place with no electrical sockets, with outdoor lavatory, with a tin bath hanging on a wall outside. If you wanted to have a bath, we kids would have one on a Sunday, and the parents would all fill up this tin bath with hot water that was boiled on the stoves.
You're not actually making this up,
No,
are you?
not at all. That's how it was for us, yeah.
And
cobbled streets and
you had outside loos.
Yeah, we had one outside loo in this block at the back.
Shared by the whole slum row?
That row and the row backing onto it. That was with back-to-back terraces. So there'd be 4 in your row and then 4 in the other row backing on, and you would share this backyard area with washing lines and with the lavatory and the tin bath.
So were there queues for the loo of a morning?
I can't remember if there were. There must have been. There must have been a fair few arguments about it as well if somebody went in there to read the newspaper.
Is that likely? Would the Times they'd have...
I don't think it was the Times, James. They may have taken the Sun, but I don't know if they were accused. But I was quite lucky in a way, but because I was a chronic bedwetter, so I never needed to go to the loo first thing in the mornings. I'd already been.
So and you had what sort of soft loo paper with?
No, we had cut up newspaper that was with holes in it that was attached to a piece of string, and that's what you'd use.
I mean, this would have been normal, I imagine, for quite a significant proportion of the British population in the 1930s. But in the 60s or 70s?
60s, that would be.
Right.
I don't know. It was normal for us. It was a condemned area. It's all been knocked down now. But it's been knocked down and everybody was moved out. And new people were moved into the new houses that they built who didn't know each other. So although they've all got indoor loos now and bars, they've also got gun crime and drug dealers all over the place.
So... Okay, so you came from this very, very poor background, and you were obviously anomalously bright.
I think I was quite bright, yeah.
But were you aware of how bright you were? Were you aware of thinking, I'm so different, I'm going to be famous one day,
We're all going to be famous one day. No, I wasn't aware that I was any brighter than anybody else, to be fair. And there were people there more bright than me.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a fellow called Jack Fairley who was cleverer than me. He used to beat me in most of the exams. And he went to Nottingham Boys High School on a scholarship. And then he went off to Dundee University, and he now runs a toy company in Newport.
So he's done all right for himself.
Yeah, he's done very well, Jack, yeah.
But do you feel that the school failed you, working class kids?
My infant school and my junior school were fine. They were very competitive and very old school. But when I went to comprehensive school, it had not long become a comprehensive school, and they'd introduced a number of different things, like they got rid of any competitive exams, they got rid of any streaming, they got rid of competitive sport to an extent, so you play without goals.
Who invented this?
I don't know. I think it was forced upon the teachers, and certainly the PE teachers weren't very happy about it. We were told that the whole philosophy was if you had winners, then you had to have losers, and that was a bad thing.
Which we're still hearing now in the debate over the reintroduction of grammar schools.
Yeah.
That in order to have winners, you've got to have losers. That's that old leftist slogan.
Exactly, the leftist chestnut. But the thing is, it was so bad at my school that, for example, we had 6 houses, and in every house they split them into 2 classes. And instead of having a 1A and a 1B, or for me it was Portland House, so there could be a Portland A and a Portland B.
Sounds quite posh, Gary.
Yeah, I know it sounds posh.
Sounds like a prep school. Sounds like Ludgrave or something.
Yeah, well, you needed to be there to see how posh it was, James. If you'd said it was posh, you'd have been beaten up.
Would I have been?
I would have thought so. You'd been beaten up anyway, but I'm sure you're used to that.
Yeah.
It was Portland A and Portland Alpha.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't have an A and a B.
Of course. Oh, I'm sure that distinction was that nice distinction was very much appreciated by the children at the school at the
I
time.
didn't even realise it, until about 2 years ago when somebody pointed it out to me.
Yeah.
At the time, that's just what it was.
Yeah. You must have a sip of tea to
will, yeah.
fuel you. So, you had this very ordinary education. And
it wasn't an ordinary education, it was a crap education.
Crap education.
Nothing ordinary about going to a school full of enthusiasm for learning and coming out with no qualifications whatsoever, without having had a single word of Shakespeare read to you, without knowing who the King of England was before the current Queen. And if you'd asked me any historical dates, 1066 was about all I could give you. It was desperate. The sixth form in the school was like a phone box. There was no ambition. For us, it was a question of going down the pit. As I said in my book, if you've read about...
I've read your book.
Well, it's very good of you, James.
It does get plugged at the beginning of the show, don't worry.
I'm very, very happy to hear it.
But let's remind listeners, shall we? It's called Animal QC.
Animal QC.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I write in there about when we went to see the careers officer, and all of us lads from the coal mining village, we were all desperate to do fantastic things like kids were.
Yeah.
So I think I went in there and I wanted to be a lorry driver, and they said, got a lot of lorries at the pit that you can drive. That coal needs transporting. And Stephen Savage wanted to be an astronaut, and they said, you can get used to working in the dark on your own down the pit. And Mick Pringle said he wanted to be a vet, and they said, you can get to work with
pit
ponies and canaries.
Yeah, now that's poetic. They don't have canaries down there.
They did have canaries. They jolly well did.
And so how many days did you spend down to pit?
I never saw a lump of coal, James.
Did you?
I never did, no. I went to do an exam when I was put into this place called Rosler, Raising the School Leaving Age, which was a class where people had to sit until they could leave school at the Easter. And they sent me off to do an exam, and I did an exam. And after I'd started at the pit, I was then written and offered an apprenticeship as a mechanic, so I thought that's a better lifestyle, so I went to do that. But I was useless, and I got the sack after 3 days. So I then was out of the pit then, so I just went off and became a forklift truck driver in a pet foods warehouse for a couple of years.
And was that fulfilling?
It was fulfilling, yeah, it was. I used to do all my wages on a... obviously, as everybody did then, on a Saturday and a Sunday, Friday night as well. So you'd have nothing left during the week. We were pretty poor because my father had abandoned the whole family by then, and my mum was not very well. So there wasn't a lot of money going around. So during the week, I had to fill myself up with cheese-flavoured bonios and Good Boy chocolate drops.
You did. Right. And was it about this point in your life that you turned to crime, or was that after your football hooligan phase?
No, I was a football hooligan by day,
Right.
well, by Saturday, and a forklift truck driver during the week.
No, you were called Animal. Your
I was
nickname
called Animal, yeah.
But I think that this was not because you were a particularly vicious hooligan, although you'd like people to think
It's
that.
very difficult to remember now. I think it was to do with my fighting prowess and my courage and bravado.
That's not what you say in your book, Gary.
Okay, there was a little bit to do with... we used to rob this shop in Derby on the way to any away games in the northwest of England, and everybody would go into the off-licence area and steal every bit of alcohol that was in there. All the staff would rush to try and stop them, like African farmers trying to stop a plague of locusts. And the rest of the shop would be open for me and my trolley to go and get whatever food I wanted. And so when I get back on the coach, I had a family block of ice cream and some wafers and no knife to cut it. So I just put a wafer on either side and started eating it. And somebody said, "Look at you, Gary, you're like an animal." And it just stuck from there.
Even though now it turns out that you are in fact a lightweight who was only called Animal because
It turns out I'm a lightweight.
Nevertheless, I imagine you did actually get involved in some rucks.
Yeah, we got involved in lots of fights, absolutely. There was a lot of running and chasing and handbags, but there was...
So you're more like hide and seek.
There was a lot of that, but you did sometimes, by surprise probably, find yourself facing up to somebody and they weren't running, you weren't running, you'd have to have a fight with them. And
so it's a bit like Michael Caine. I mean, you and Michael Caine have something in common, that you've actually seen the elephant. Because, of course, Michael Caine, one of my favourite stories about Michael Caine is he was sent out for his national service to Korea.
Right.
And at one stage his platoon was surrounded by Chinese, and they had to basically fight their way out of it.
Right.
And it was all or nothing. And I imagine that, in your own way, Gary, your character has been forged in similar... but actually, it must be quite scary.
I'd have thought it is. I know when I was being battered once in Derby,
Yeah.
beaten to within an inch of my life, and somebody had said to me halfway through, you can go through this secret door and you'll be surrounded by Chinese with Michael Caine in Korea, I'd have gone for it.
Yeah, well, how do you cope with having the shit beaten out of you? Does it sort of deaden after a while, or does it...
It's deadened all the way through, really. You don't feel any pain during it. You
Just
feel it
the adrenaline.
afterwards. I think so, yeah. It's afterwards. But this time in Derby, I remember that somebody asked me where I was from, and I'd lied and said I was from Spondon. I was surrounded by about 100 of them. And somebody stepped forward who was from Spondon, asked me which street. And he was the biggest lad there. And the old trick is pick the biggest one, give them a smack. If they go down, everybody else doesn't want any. So I said Forest Street, smacked him in the nose. He went down like a sack of shit. And for about 3 seconds, everybody looked at me, and then they pounced on me and kicked the living shit out of me. For about 2 days, it seemed.
And so it doesn't hurt when it happens, but it's only afterwards. It's a bit like if you ever go fox hunting, Gary, when you injure yourself. It's a similar thing. When I came off my horse recently and really fucked myself over quite badly.
Yeah.
All I wanted to do was get back on the horse to show everyone that I was a jolly chap and I was all right.
Right.
But then later on, it hurts, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I wasn't very keen on getting back on the horse. I was quite happy to lick my wounds and go straight to the hospital, which I did, in fact. But it's probably just like fox hunting, exactly.
But there can't be many QCs out there, which for American listeners is what. Tell us about what a QC is.
Queen's Counsel, appointed by Her Majesty as one of Her Majesty's Council.
And how many are there?
It's about 8% of all barristers, I think, are QCs. But I don't know.
But it is the kind of apogee of the law, isn't it?
Yeah, it's what everybody aspires to do if they can.
Yeah. So of the QCs out there, I would imagine that very few of them, in fact none, have come from mining villages in Nottinghamshire, and also very few of them can look after themselves in a fight.
I think that's probably right. And it's a very sad thing that I'm still doing it at the age of 56 as a QC and a pillar of the establishment. But whenever I go into court for a long trial, I always look around and think, right, I think I've got any trouble with any of this lot here.
Well, I could have him easy.
Yeah, I could have him and his dad. And generally speaking, I think that I don't come across that many QCs that often where I'm troubled.
And I would imagine that if anyone, in the unlikely event that anyone does best you in argument, you can console yourself that you could just beat the shit out of him afterwards if you wanted.
If I wanted, yes. Yes, that is an option that's available to me. I haven't taken it up. I did at bar school have a scrap with another barrister, but that was...
Did you?
Yeah, that was very unfortunate. We played against Gray's Inn at football, and I turned up wearing my Nottingham Forest shirt because we were wearing darks, and they were wearing lights because we didn't have kit, and he was the centre forward for the opposition in a Derby County shirt. And it was just going to happen. You could see it.
And
so
you had two barristers scrapping.
We say scrapping. He came. He's a big bull of a man. He's actually in my chambers now. He's a nice fellow, and he suffered, he thinks, one foul too many from me, and he came at me and swung a punch at me, and it was a bit of a crap punch, really. And I just stepped in and gave him 2 or 3 jabs and dropped him.
Were you reprimanded by your chambers or whatever it was?
No, I wasn't in the chambers.
Oh, no,
I was still at bar school.
Okay.
I wasn't even reprimanded by the referee. Who's another QC called Mike Evans. I am a bit worried about Mike Evans, though, because he's got black belts in practically every martial art that there is.
Now, we're going to have a short break, and then we're going to go back, and we're going to talk about your days at Eton.
Yes,
which
may
surprise some listeners. And we're going to talk about your time when you broke the law and almost destroyed your entire life.
Almost.
You're listening to Delingpole with me, James Delingpole, on Podcast 1. More with our special guest, Gary Bell, Animal QC, in just a moment.
Hey everybody, I'm Tim Barnacle.
And I'm Harry Hill. We're the hosts of a new podcast called How I Got Here. Everybody has a story, and we've heard great ones from people all over the country.
People like Tom Brokaw,
Ken Burns, Maria Shriver, and Larry King.
You can listen to How I Got Here on podcast1.com.
And please subscribe to the show on iTunes.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
You're listening to Delingpole with me, James Delingpole, on Podcast 1. More now with our special guest, Gary Bell, Animal QC. Again, there cannot be many practicing lawyers who have criminal records.
I don't think so.
No. How did you get your criminal record?
It was really crap. And I'll tell people I got a conviction for conspiracy to defraud. And it sounds very grand. It sounds like some multi-billion-pound Wolf of Wall Street type thing. But the fact was that when I left Pedigree Wholesale as a forklift truck driver and joined the fire brigade in 1978, I had to wait for my training course to start, and I was sent off. I had about 2 months to kill, so I got a job at Manpower Service Agency, who sent me off to Belfruit to test fruit machines. And I worked out that if I drilled a hole in a 10p piece and put a bit of fishing line in it, I could test all the fruit machines I wanted in pubs and clubs around Nottingham and keep the money. So I did that, and I think that there were reports to the police that these fruit machines, when people went to empty them, they'd already been emptied, so they were on the lookout for us. And somebody called the police when I was in a pub in Southall, and the police officer came outside and said, "Can I have a word, please, sir?" And I went to run for it, but I had £345 in 10p pieces in my pockets. It was like Neil Armstrong in moon boots. I don't think the copper even realised I'd run.
So then you had your brief taste of life inside. Are you only on remand? Is that
I was on
remand?
Oh yeah, I was on remand for 5 days and then another 7 days, and then bailed and eventually given 6 months, but suspended.
Right.
In view of my youth and my previous good character.
Right. Right. What good character was this?
Well, it was a good character from a court's perspective, James. And from where I came, it was very good character.
And so do you think your brief taste of life inside has given you a better insight into the world of the criminals you defend on a daily basis? Do you think it gives you an edge?
No, I don't think the life inside does. I think the life that I led and the fact that I was rubbing shoulders with people who casual dishonesty and criminality was just the order of the day where I grew up.
Yeah.
And I understand the motivations for people, why they do these things, whether they're bad people or they're just forced into something and haven't thought it through properly.
Do you think it makes you a better lawyer?
I don't know. Probably not. Everybody likes to think that they're a better lawyer because they've got some empathy and some understanding.
Special skill.
Yeah, some special skill, but I don't think it makes me a better lawyer. I think it makes me a better lawyer than some of the left-wing lawyers who are these general liberals that think that they understand the lives that people have led.
Yes, who are you thinking of in particular? Michael Mansfield, QC?
I'm not going to name any of these
fair
lawyers,
enough.
but I will say about that there are some, I don't know if Michael's one of them, there are some lawyers who would say, for example, I don't represent people charged with rape because I find the offence morally abhorrent. But if I didn't represent people who were charged with offences that I disagree with morally, I wouldn't go to work.
Well, exactly. No, I mean, you must be eternally grateful to all the criminals out there for feeding your family and putting them through school and stuff.
I'd much sooner that they weren't criminals, James. I'd much sooner that people weren't forced to commit crime or weren't evil enough to commit crime, and that we had a much nicer society, but we don't. So, yes.
Yeah. So, I wanted to ask you about this, but perhaps when we can talk about your university days.
Right.
But before we get there, how on earth did you end up reading law at Bristol University after your criminal offence?
After my criminal offence, I got the sack from the fire brigade. I got the sack from Asda as a forklift truck driver. I got the sack from Martins the Builders because of my conviction. And I got a bit of money back from the fire brigade, so I went off travelling abroad to find my fame and fortune, and ended up finding neither, and did all my money very quickly and couldn't go home. The shame of going home after having said goodbye to everybody forever. So I was drifting around London and Europe for about the next year to 18 months, just sleeping rough and doing jobs as and when I could find them, which was very difficult at the time. Got very thin, which was a very positive thing about it. And then came back to England after Forest had won the European Cup final in Madrid, because I was told there that my mother was pretty ill, because we didn't have phones or anything like that, so I couldn't stay in touch with them. And I came home and she was ill, and so I stayed down in Nottingham and registered at a local college to do my O-levels.
Right.
At the age of 21.
And you sailed through those?
Yeah, once you're back on the treadmill, you're back on it, really. So O-levels leads to A-levels, leads to a degree, and I applied to Bristol to do a degree, and it was the middle of the miners' strike, so they were...
Oh, did you play the miners' sympathy card?
I didn't play it on purpose, no, but they back in those days, I don't know how this was allowed in the 1980s, but you had to write on the front of your UCA, your university application form, your father's occupation. So your mother's was completely irrelevant. It was father's occupation. Yeah. And obviously I wrote mine down as coal miner, which is right, although I hadn't seen my dad for about 8 years then. And when I got to the interview, there were 2 lecturers who were interviewing me. One of them, they had a bust of Lenin on the desk, and I thought this might work out all right. And they asked me how I'd got to the interview, and I said I'd hitchhiked, which I had. I used to hitchhike everywhere. Yeah. And they asked how long it took. I told them 2 days, which was true. And they looked really upset. And they thought I'd come from Nottingham, but I was living in Stuttgart at the time with my girlfriend, so 2 days wasn't a bad effort from there. And they tried to give me some money, and I wouldn't take it. And they asked me if things were tough on the estate.
And you said, happen as they are.
Yeah. I tell them. Well, I did speak like that back then. Oh, right. Absolutely. I keep being asked if I can do it now, and it's quite tricky to jump back into my old accent.
What the Nottingham accent? I mean, I was doing sort of a generic Yorkshire there.
Yeah, just
because I can't do
just a general northern accent.
What does the Nottinghamshire accent sound like?
If I try and do it now, it's probably a parody of what it used to be like. But a Nottingham accent, it's a great accent. It's the best accent in the country. We think it is anyway.
So this is how D.H. Lawrence would have spoken.
He'd have
the gamekeeper.
Yeah, he would have spoken more like that, and Lawrence would have had a bit more of a Derby twang because he was from Eastwood.
Right. Is there a difference between Derbyshire accent and Eastwood? Oh, I bet there is.
You can tell a Nottinghamshire accent every 3 or 4 miles. There's a slight variation and a slight change.
So you were at Bristol, and
I was at Bristol.
I imagine that these left-wing, middle-class professors or whatever,
yes,
they felt like they'd won the golden ticket.
They'd
found a genuine working-class miner's son during the miners' strike. They must have bent over backwards to give you a place there.
They told me straight away, we'll see you next year, and they were absolutely overjoyed. They didn't know what they'd done, and they didn't realise that not every working-class northern coal miner's son is not a fan of Lenin.
When did they discover that your politics were not as impeccably left-wing as they felt that working-class people ought to have?
I think it was day one when Ben Emerson QC, who's been in the news a bit recently, proposed that we give our entire law club budget, which had been earmarked for drink, to the striking miners' family, and I spoke out against it, saying, fuck 'em, let's spending on drink. Backed up by Alex Cameron QC.
Who was the brother of a certain future Prime Minister, is that right?
He would have been a future Prime Minister at the time.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think some of the lecturers were appalled that I'd taken that stance.
Were they? Oh, they got to hear about it?
Oh, yeah, they were in the room.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
But isn't that the way of the upper middle classes? They love to patronise the working classes, and they know what's best for them.
They know exactly what's best for them. They can't articulate on their own behalf, so they need people like Polly Toynbee or general lefties who can tell them what it is that they want and espouse. We get people like Harriet Harman talking about posh George Osborne because he went to St Paul's, whereas she went to St Paul's.
Yes,
and
that is a good distinction there.
For the working classes, you chuck Harriet Harman and Ed Miliband and David Cameron. Even Jeremy Corbyn, they're all as posh as each other. They all live lives that are far removed from the life that I lived when I was young, and people can't understand it. And the idea that it's like this recent Brexit thing. suddenly people have decided that those who voted for Brexit were ignorant Northerners, and that they...
Yes, they do, yes.
Yeah, they're ignorant Northerners, so therefore we should have another vote, and maybe these people shouldn't be allowed to vote next time.
I've heard this argument advanced quite a lot, and I mean the snobbery in it is extraordinary. I mean, if it were voiced by the other side, they'd be down our throats. Like, because I speak as a fellow, I imagine you did vote Brexit,
James. It was a secret vote, and I'm not saying anything.
No.
You know.
So I wouldn't want to pry, Gary.
Well, you're not going to pry.
No.
My biggest problem is that my oldest son, who, like Georges Monbiot, went to Stowe and then became a socialist.
So he's had it tough, yeah.
He's had it very tough. He did a degree in European politics, and then he did a master's in Belgium in the University of Leuven in European politics, and then he worked for a year at the European Parliament. And so I have mixed loyalties when it comes to Brexit. I can see the goods and bads of both sides of it. I wish during the campaign that people have been honest about the goods and bads on both sides of it. The only one who's been honest about the fact there was goods and bads was the new Prime Minister, although she decided not to say anything during the campaign about that. But
just tell me the goods of European Union membership for a moment. I mean, do you mean about getting your son a job?
Yes.
Any others you can think of?
Well, that's the main one. I think, is it the Le Touquet agreement where we have the border over in France is a very good thing for us.
But that's independent of the EU anyway.
Well, we'll see. They might ram it down our throats
I
and
think they might.
We can have the jungle somewhere in Dover. But I think that the thing about Brexit is, and the wonderful thing about it is that if the economy is going to flounder as a result of Brexit, and it doesn't, and it goes up to by 0.5%, Carney having had to increase his estimate again, then nobody would say it looks like we might be wrong on that, when overseas companies, and this is something I was worried about, wouldn't be investing in Britain because they wouldn't have access to the single market. And then Nissan decided they're going to build 2 new cars in Sunderland. I don't think anybody on the Remain side is ever going to say, we might actually have been wrong about that.
Actually, you are probably the only genuine working class person I'm ever going to interview on this podcast.
I don't think you know anymore, James.
No, I don't, exactly. So I'm straight up about this. So can I ask you, as a genuine working class person, why it is that so many Britons voted to leave the EU?
I think that Northern in particular, and maybe not just Northern, Southern as well, working class people in this country do have some quite right-wing views, but they're not catered for within our political system. Because we have a first-past-the-post system, you either vote Conservative or Labour, or if you're mad, you vote Liberal. And that's pretty much the entire choice. If you want to vote for an extremist right-wing party, you know they're going to get precious few votes, they're going to get no seats, even UKIP. So there's no point doing it. In the rest of Europe, all of these countries have quite healthy extreme left-wing and extreme right-wing parties. Yeah. You have the Front National in France and other similar parties in the other European states that get quite big votes. And in this country, that doesn't happen. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have people that think that way. Yeah. Of course we do. But they don't have, they can't vote for any party that reflects their views. And I think when it comes to a referendum like Brexit, they do step to the fore. And I'm sure a lot of people did vote for ignorant reasons. But that's democracy.
Well, were they
bigoted? Yeah, I'm sure that you voted, James, because you looked at the economy, you looked at the situation, you were concerned about sovereignty, you were concerned about a number of things which were quasi-intellectual. Yeah. But a lot of people wouldn't have done that. They'd just have said, I'm not having it, I've got too many foreigners here.
Yeah. But also, it was a Archers at Agincourt thing, wasn't it, as well? It was a bit like sort of, screw you, Johnny Foreigner. I mean, there was a sense that we've been pushed around enough by these bloody Eurocrats and things, and we want our country back, which seems to me
I don't think there was. No, I disagree. I think that is the reason why you voted it, and you can see that when we went into a the common market,
Yeah.
where we'd have a free trading area.
Yeah.
We didn't think at that time that what we would also have is common courts. We'd have this free movement between countries. We'd have a science budget of about £800 billion a year, so they could come up with some rubbish. We didn't think we'd get all that.
Yeah.
And the ever closer European ties, the Liberal Party saying that they look forward to a time when the boundaries of the countries of Europe are of no more significance than the county boundaries in the United Kingdom. That's not what people voted for.
No, that's not.
And if that's a little Englander mentality, then that's not a bad thing in my view.
I would imagine, Gary, that quite a lot of your colleagues
Yes.
were very much part of the European project and are furious that we're leaving. And I mean, what percentage of lawyers would you say are bloody lefties?
Oh, there's not that many lefties. There's a fair few of them.
Okay, liberal. I'm talking about liberal lefties. You're just sort of
Yeah, a lot of them are liberal.
bien-pensant.
There are quite a lot of bien-pensant liberal lefties there. But certainly, if I go to the roving rooms and there's discussions about Brexit, generally speaking, people are angry that we've voted for Brexit.
Yes.
If I go back to Cockgrave, my mining village, which I do
Yeah.
quite regularly, and have a pint with my mates, they're all cock-a-hoop and they're very, very overjoyed about the whole thing.
Given that you've got slightly unhealthy politics, I mean, you're not a model of political correctness, I would say, Gary.
I know, probably not.
Do you sometimes have to bite your tongue when you're with your fellow QCs, or do you enjoy winding them up?
I think they wind me up, James, really, with their views. And I don't bite my tongue at all. I let them know exactly what I think.
Right.
Politically.
How does that go down?
Sometimes it's a bit of a struggle for them. They struggle with it.
We were going to talk, were we not, about your days at Eton.
Yes.
Which may contradict what we said earlier about you having been brought up in a poor mining village. But is it actually true that you have been back to Eton as an old boy and played in the field game?
Yes, I played for the old boys field game teams. I'm probably a bit old for it now, and now they've abolished the RAM. There's very little.
What is the field game, by the way?
The field game.
So I wasn't at Eton. Unlike you, I wasn't at Eton.
I know, James. You probably couldn't pull it off either.
No.
Don't they have a Malvern field game?
I'm afraid they don't. No. We've got the Leather at Malvern, which is
Right.
cross country run. But I'm sure you'd been brilliant at that.
I was tremendous at it.
But tell us about your time as an OE playing the field game.
When I was at university and I turned up as this white socked wearing, tight jeans, comb in the back pocket, moustache, skinhead, with my check short sleeve shirt, I was taken to one side and told that everything I was wearing and everything about me was wrong.
Yeah.
Even the moustache, apparently.
Yes.
So the Sloane Rangers Handbook was out at the time, and I thought, well,
I remember this era well.
Yes. So I thought, why don't I just follow all of the rules in the Sloane Ranger Handbook? Get rid of all of my clothes and buy out new stuff, change my accent to what it is now.
Yeah.
And I set about doing that during the summer of my first year. But when I got back, I was told that it was all very well passing yourself off as posh,
Yeah.
but the first question you'll be asked is where you went to school. And if you say I went to some dump comprehensive school in Nottingham, that was it. It was all over. And it was bad enough anyway, being called Gary, which is not a particularly posh name.
It
You'll be
hasn't
aware,
changed,
James.
has it? I mean, are there any posh Garys? Gary Player was.
I don't
was
think
a
there
sort
are
of-
any Garys anymore. I think it's a name. It's practically disappeared, but it's a working class name. I
Yeah.
could have changed to my brother's name, Kevin, or I could have used my middle name, Terry.
Well, you could have said it was short for Garfield or something like that.
I did do that actually.
you?
Yes,
Did you?
I'm afraid I did, and I also toyed with changing it to Algernon,
Yeah.
but I thought not. So I stuck with it, but I was told that I needed a backstory, and if I was going to pretend I went to a school I didn't go to, what is the point of pretending you went to a school other than the best one?
Yes.
So I was an Old Etonian, and I became an Old Etonian.
And you had quite a few OE friends at
I did,
at Bristol,
yes. They
didn't
taught
you?
me, yeah. They did. My head of house, Tubby Sanders, was one who helped me most.
Right.
Yeah, we were in MFW. That was our house.
Right, was it? Right, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we played the field game, I always wanted to play one of the really sort of posh positions like short, but I wasn't fast enough or good enough for it, or didn't know the rules well enough, so they put me in the bully, and I played up or corner post.
Well, only Etonians are listening to this, if there are any, are going to be understanding these references. Maybe not even many Etonians play the field game, I don't think, or certainly don't understand the rules. Is it like football?
Understanding the rules is something I can't pretend to be able to do. It's a bit like football, yes, it is, but it's also much more physically violent, a bit like rugby as well.
Right. And when you went back as an old boy, did you persuade those who weren't in on the trick? Did you persuade them that you had been?
Oh yeah, lots of them. In fact, it got so bad that when people said that they didn't remember me there, I'd round on them and accuse them of not going, and they'd have to defend themselves.
I can imagine you using that sort of trick quite a lot in court and elsewhere. That sort of low cunning and
low cunning. But no, it's great going there and playing the field game and seeing how these people went to school. And
did you? You didn't play that trick when you were trying to become a QC, did you? Did you sort of?
No, it worked better the other way when I was becoming a QC, James.
Of course,
absolutely.
Yes. Let's have another break.
Okay,
and then we'll round off the final segment where I don't know what we're going to talk about. We can talk about
anything you like.
Anything I like. You're listening to Delingpole with me, James Delingpole, on Podcast 1. More with our special guest, Gary Bell, Animal QC, in just a moment.
Stay tuned for 60-second AP News headlines.
AP Update, I'm Diane Kepley. Questions are swirling in Washington about the contacts between Trump administration officials and the Russians.
Was General Flynn directed or authorized to do what he did? What was the extent of his conversations and contacts with Russia? Who else from the Trump administration, transition, or campaign had contact with the Russians?
Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer and others are calling for an independent investigation to get the answers to those questions. There is pushback from President Trump. This morning, he's lashing out at the news media, saying the fake news media is going crazy with what he calls their conspiracy theories and blind hatred. He adds in his tweet, the Russian connection nonsense is an attempt to cover up mistakes made in Hillary Clinton's losing campaign. Meantime, in Moscow, a Kremlin spokesman is denying reports about intercepted phone calls between intelligence officials and members of the Trump presidential campaign. AP Update.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
You're listening to Delingpole with me, James Delingpole, on Podcast 1. More now with our special guest, Gary Bell, Animal QC. Now you've escaped your working class roots. You've married into the upper middle classes, haven't you? I mean, you've actually got a wife who's actually called Sophie.
She's called Sophie. She's got a bit of a line in Berks Landed Gentry.
And she's got brother Wilf, who was at Eton, is that right?
Her brother-in-law Andrew, who was at Eton, and her father was at Eton, her grandfather was at Eton, her uncle Lloyd was at Eton, her cousin was at Eton.
So you've now become a pillar of the establishment, not just as in the legal establishment, but also you've married into this situation.
Yes.
I don't know where I was going to go with this one. What was I going to say?
Who knows how your mind works, James?
Yeah, well, exactly. Oh, that's right, yes. Do you enjoy being a member of the upper middle classes?
Well, I'm not really. I can slip into anything I want. So I could be a member of the upper middle classes, but can also go back home to Nottingham and hang out and have a few pints with my mates there. It's
just that I remember when I went round to see you the other day, you had just been to the theatre.
Yes.
With your wife. Somewhat reluctantly, I believe. And
yeah.
Just recount for us what the play was about and why it was not altogether a satisfying experience.
It was the crappiest play I've ever seen. I can't remember what it was called now. Can you remember what it was called?
No.
These Things I Believe, or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was a play about a dysfunctional family.
Yeah.
And there was one thread of it where some woman who was married to a fellow and had some kids decided she was going to leave her husband and children and go off with somebody else and pursue her dreams. And the subtext was that it's all very well women doing that. Usually it's men that do that and nobody criticises them, but if a woman abandons her children, then that's seen as a very bad thing.
And the audience were applauding this.
I think they were
imagine.
crying
They were
through
crying.
it. Well, I was crying as well for different reasons.
But then it got worse, didn't it? There was some sort of gender transformation thing going on.
There was a gender transformation for absolutely every cliche that they could drag up. They had in there. There was a gender transformation where the mother was shouting at her son who wanted to be a girl, and it wasn't entertainment, I'm afraid.
But the reason I'm asking you this is because you're in a fairly unique position in that you can observe the mores of the upper middle classes or the chattering classes or whatever from the perspective of an outsider. They must look like an alien species, and you must have thought about why is it that so many of the educated classes are so drawn to this liberal bilge.
I don't understand why they are, but there are two things about it. Firstly, they have to be very well off, and all of the liberal stuff that they espouse mustn't make a difference to their standard of living. They have to remain wealthy.
Yes.
And that gives them the luxury, really.
So that would explain their attraction to these causes, like the current obsession with transgender rights and stuff.
Yeah,
it's never going to affect them.
Something like transgender rights, my own view is probably the same as yours, which is if you're a man and want to be a woman, or if you want to be a man, that's nothing to do with me. Get on with it. It's of no consequence to me whatsoever whether somebody wants to be a man or a woman or gay or straight. But a lot of these people are massively obsessed with it, the liberal middle class elite, and it's like, for example, the names that you might give people. I had to correct, from a liberal perspective, recently, a friend of mine's grandmother who described her grandchildren as half-caste.
Yeah.
And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, that's racist, you can't say that. And she is an 80-year-old West Indian woman, Jamaican woman. She looked at me like there was something wrong with me.
Yes. That is a new thing, because certainly when I was growing up, half-caste was not a...
Yeah, but the names change every couple of years just so that the people who got used to using the new names can be castigated and told that the expression that they're using now means that they're a fiendish racist.
It's designed to make people uncomfortable, isn't it? And put them constantly on their mettle and constantly censor their own speech.
I think it probably is. And it leaves people like Stevie Wonder, with his living for the city, to find a job is like a haystack needle, because where he lives there is coloured people. Stevie's now a racist.
Stevie is a racist.
Yeah.
Do you
should
find
be pilloried for it?
Has this actually infected the courts? I mean, I don't know whether you followed the case of that hideous bint, Charlotte Proudman.
What has she done? I haven't.
Oh, she's one of those. She seems to want to be defined by the fact that she's a woman,
Right.
Experiencing sexism, rather than being defined by being a bloody good barrister.
Right.
And I think that's a bit of a... If my daughter went into the law...
Yes.
I would be thinking, go girl, I want you to be the top barrister in your field. I wouldn't be thinking, I want you to be being the top victim of society's ingrained sexism in your field.
Right. I don't see a great deal of sexism at the bar. I know that there have been complaints by Liz Truss, and even heard them echoed by the new Lord Chief Justice, that there aren't enough women on the High Court benches, that women don't get far enough within the law. And I agree with that. I think there should be more women in higher positions. But I don't know how that's going to be achieved. You don't see any day-to-day sexism. I'm sure that women that apply for jobs are treated, those applications are dealt with on merit. I just could not believe anybody within the profession that I work in would say, no, we won't have you because you're a woman. It just couldn't happen.
Has it not gone too far the other way? I mean, we've got Alison Saunders in charge of the Crown Prosecution Service, and she seems to be on some kind of mission to increase the number of rape convictions, for example, which has led to a spate of trials brought by the CPS, which, in my view, certainly should never have been brought. You know, young men being named and shamed in the newspapers and then being acquitted when it emerges that the evidence against them is very flimsy, and that the history of the person making the accusation is indicative that they're a pretty unreliable witness. Does that worry you at all?
I don't do that sort of offence anymore. It's become very specialised. It may be right that the number of convictions for rape are low, but everybody's entitled to have a fair trial, and the jury return the verdict, and we should be true to that verdict as a society. Yeah. And I think that's the more important thing. But I don't think she's doing a bad job as Director of Public Prosecutions. Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose that she's kind of your boss, isn't she? No, I don't prosecute. Oh, yeah. No, she's got nothing on me at all. So you just do, what, just minor crimes like murder? People accused of murder, fraud, major drugs conspiracies, things like that. And what do you prefer to deal with in court? A nice juicy murder trial? I like a bit of a mix, James, really. Yeah. I like a bit of a mix. I think it's variety is the spice of life. Yeah, yeah. Gary, it's been very, very entertaining. James, it's always a joy. I hope it is. I didn't know if I'd said anything that would get me struck off or sent to prison. Or you were impeccable, but you're quick on your feet. I mean, it's your bloody job. Your ungrateful offspring, your spoilt offspring depend on it, don't they? Yeah, well, they all do. That is the great problem when you say that lawyers, you hate them because they're more wealthy than you. Yeah. I've yet to meet anybody in any profession that can earn money faster than his wife can spend it. Thanks, Gary Bell. Thank you so much for listening. This was Delingpole with James Delingpole on Podcast 1 with our special guest, Gary Bell, Animal QC. Thank you and goodbye.